Some people think a locked garage door is enough. Mine proved that the biggest mistake an HOA can make is believing the homeowner isn't watching. The first thing I heard wasn't a voice. It was the slow electric hum of my garage door rolling upward while I was standing nearly 40 miles away finishing an alarm installation for a customer outside Fort Worth. My phone vibrated once in my pocket, the familiar notification from my security system that almost always meant a package delivery or a curious raccoon wandering across my driveway after sunrise. I pulled the phone out with one dusty hand, expecting another harmless alert. Instead, the live camera feed loaded, and my stomach tightened before my brain had time to process what I was seeing. Two people wearing bright blue polo shirts with the Willow Creek HOA inspection logo were already standing inside my garage. They weren't knocking. They weren't waiting for permission. They weren't even pretending to be there by accident. One of them slowly opened the metal cabinet where I kept expensive electrical testing equipment, while the other walked around taking photographs with a tablet like he was documenting a crime scene that didn't exist. The smell of fresh sawdust from the customer's workshop suddenly disappeared from my mind, replaced by the memory of motor oil, cedar shelves, and every tool I had spent years collecting one paycheck at a time. My garage wasn't just another room attached to my house. It was where I rebuilt my life after my divorce. Every cordless drill, every security panel, every spool of wire sitting on those shelves represented another weekend job, another satisfied customer, another step towards starting over. I watched one inspector point toward a locked toolbox before reaching for the handle. He tugged twice, frowned, then shrugged at his partner. They laughed. I couldn't hear every word through the camera microphone, but I heard enough to know they felt completely comfortable walking through property that wasn't theirs. They moved deeper inside as if they owned the place. What neither of them knew was that my garage wasn't protected by one camera. It had 12 wide-angle cameras, close-up cameras, motion sensors, audio recording. Every angle overlapped another, leaving almost no blind spots anywhere inside the building. Years of installing security systems had made me a little obsessive about coverage. Customers used to joke that my own garage was safer than most banks. Looking at my screen, I realized those extra cameras were about to become the most valuable investment I had ever made. I stayed perfectly still beside my work van while the customer continued talking behind me, completely unaware that my attention had shifted somewhere else. My pulse stayed steady. My breathing stayed calm. Anger would come later if it needed to. Right now, evidence mattered more than emotion. I pressed the record archive button, backed up every live feed directly to my cloud server, and watched the inspectors continue exploring my garage with the confidence of people who had never imagined anyone would ever question what they were doing. That confidence was exactly what was about to destroy them. I should probably explain why that garage mattered so much to me, because if it had only been a place to park my truck, I would have driven home, changed the locks, and forgotten the whole thing. But life does not always give you the luxury of starting over twice. My name is Nathan Brooks. I am 38 years old, and for the last 11 years I have made a living installing home security systems across North Texas. Every camera, motion sensor, smart lock, and alarm panel I install helps another family sleep a little easier at night. There is something satisfying about knowing that a few carefully placed devices can make honest people feel safe inside their own homes. After my divorce 2 years earlier, I sold the larger house my former wife and I had shared and bought a modest 3-bedroom place in Willow Creek. It was quiet, close to my customers, and had one feature I cared about more than anything else: an oversized 2-car garage with enough space for my workbench, inventory shelves, and every specialized tool I had collected throughout my career. That garage became my office, my warehouse, and honestly, my therapy room. Every Saturday morning, the smell of fresh coffee mixed with cedar lumber, machine oil, and clean electrical wire, while classic rock played softly through an old speaker mounted above my workbench. I rebuilt cameras, tested new equipment, organized customer orders, and planned the coming week. Every shelf had a purpose. Every drawer had a label. Even the smallest screwdriver sat exactly where it belonged. Customers often joked that I treated the place like an operating room, and maybe they were right. Order gave me peace after a chapter of my life that had felt anything but orderly. That was also why I invested more money protecting my own property than most people thought was reasonable. Every entrance had encrypted smart locks. Every camera recorded locally, and automatically backed up to secure cloud storage. Motion sensors overlapped one another, so nothing important disappeared between frames. I never imagined those systems would become evidence against people wearing official neighborhood badges. Looking back, maybe I should have seen the warning signs earlier. Willow Creek looked picture-perfect from the outside. Freshly trimmed lawns, matching mailboxes, tree-lined sidewalks, and neighbors who waved politely while walking their dogs each evening. It was the kind of subdivision real estate agents described with words like peaceful and family-friendly. Underneath that polished surface, though, there was another layer that newcomers usually discovered the hard way. The homeowners association seemed less interested in protecting property values than proving it could control every inch of private life. I ignored the stories at first. Every neighborhood had a few residents who liked to complain. I assumed most disagreements came from misunderstandings. My job taught me to rely on facts instead of rumors. Unfortunately, facts have a way of arriving at your front door when you least expect them, and mine had quietly begun stacking up long before those inspectors ever stepped inside my garage. The first letter from the Homeowners Association arrived less than 3 weeks after I moved in. It was folded neatly inside a white envelope with the neighborhood logo stamped across the corner, informing me that my trash bin had remained visible from the street for longer than 24 hours after collection day. I almost laughed because the truck had come late that week, and I had been working a 12-hour installation nearly 60 miles away. I rolled the bin behind the fence that evening and figured that would be the end of it. It was not. A week later, another notice appeared. This time because my work trailer had been parked in my driveway overnight before an early morning service appointment. Then another letter claimed the color of several storage containers visible through my open garage door was not consistent with community standards. That one made me read the document twice because I honestly thought it had to be some kind of joke. None of the containers were outside. They were sitting inside my own garage. Curious more than irritated, I attended my first monthly homeowners association meeting hoping to understand how these decisions were made. That was when I first met Linda Harper. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who never expected to be questioned. She greeted residents with a polished smile that somehow disappeared the moment anyone challenged a rule or asked for clarification. During the meeting, she spoke often about protecting property values, preserving neighborhood appearance, and maintaining community expectations. On the surface, everything sounded reasonable. Yet every answer somehow circled back to giving the association broader authority instead of providing homeowners with clearer explanations. After the meeting, several neighbors quietly introduced themselves while people filtered toward the parking lot. They lowered their voices almost instinctively before mentioning Linda's name. One older man smiled politely and said, "Do yourself a favor. Keep your paperwork." A retired schoolteacher told me she photographed her own yard every weekend because violation notices sometimes arrived for problems that had already been fixed. Another neighbor admitted he simply paid small fines instead of arguing because fighting the association consumed too much time. I listened without offering much opinion. Rumors alone never convinced me. My entire career depended on evidence, and I preferred facts over neighborhood gossip. Still, I could not ignore a pattern beginning to emerge. Nearly every story involved inspections that felt unusually personal. Linda did not simply enforce rules. She seemed determined to prove that she could always find something wrong if she looked long enough. Over the following month, I noticed the same white sport utility vehicle driving slowly through the neighborhood several mornings each week. Sometimes it paused near my driveway for a few seconds before continuing down the street. Other times someone stepped out with a tablet, typed a few notes, glanced toward my house, and left without speaking to me. Everything they did remained technically polite, yet every interaction carried the unmistakable feeling of being watched. Instead of making me nervous, it made me more disciplined. I began saving every notice, photographing my property after completing weekend maintenance, and organizing everything into digital folders with dates and timestamps. At the time, I believed I was simply keeping good records. I had no idea I was quietly assembling the foundation for a case that would soon expose far more than a disagreement over neighborhood rules. By the beginning of my third month in Willow Creek, the inspection notices had become so predictable that I could almost guess when the next envelope would appear in my mailbox. Every Monday morning seemed to bring another carefully worded reminder that some tiny detail on my property supposedly required immediate attention. One notice claimed my garage door had remained open too long on a Saturday afternoon while I reorganized equipment before a large commercial installation. Another suggested that stacked lumber visible inside the garage created an appearance inconsistent with neighborhood expectations, even though nothing extended beyond my own walls. The wording always sounded professional, but the message underneath felt unmistakable. Someone wanted me to know they were paying close attention. Instead of reacting emotionally, I changed my routine. Before leaving for work each morning, I took a quick series of photographs showing my driveway, front yard, and garage entrance. Every evening when I returned home, I repeated the process before pulling my truck inside. The habit took less than 3 minutes, and every image was automatically stored with a timestamp. My neighbors probably thought I was overly cautious, but years in the security business had taught me that memories fade while records do not. A few days later, I found another letter waiting at my front door requesting what it described as a voluntary garage compliance inspection. The document encouraged me to schedule an appointment so inspectors could verify that stored materials met community guidelines. I read every line twice before setting it on my kitchen counter. I opened the governing documents for the association and spent nearly an hour reviewing every section related to inspections, homeowner responsibilities, and access rights. The language was surprisingly clear. Exterior inspections were permitted under specific circumstances. Interior access required homeowner permission except under narrowly defined emergencies involving immediate safety concerns. My garage did not qualify. There was no emergency, no damaged utility line, no active fire hazard, no structural failure. I politely declined the request in writing, thanking the association for its concern while explaining that my private workspace contained expensive customer equipment and confidential installation materials. I also referenced the exact section of the governing documents supporting my decision. 2 days passed without a response. Then another letter arrived, this time stating that failure to cooperate with inspections could result in additional enforcement measures. The wording stopped just short of making a direct threat, but the implication was obvious. Around the neighborhood, I noticed Linda's white sport utility vehicle more frequently than before. It rolled slowly past my house on weekday mornings and occasionally appeared near the community entrance when I returned from work. She never stopped to speak with me. She simply observed. One Saturday afternoon, while trimming shrubs near my front porch, I looked up and found her, standing on the sidewalk with a tablet in her hands. She smiled politely and asked whether I had reconsidered scheduling the inspection. I smiled back just as politely and explained that I always respected the association's legitimate authority, but I also respected the boundaries clearly outlined in its own governing documents. Her expression remained pleasant, yet her eyes hardened for just a fraction of a second before she wished me a nice weekend and walked away. Watching her disappear around the corner, I had the uneasy feeling that our disagreement was no longer about neighborhood rules. It had quietly become something much more personal. And people who take rules personally often begin looking for shortcuts when the rules stop working in their favor. The following Tuesday started like dozens of other workdays. I left my house just after 7 in the morning, loaded with replacement cameras, network switches, and enough cable to finish a commercial security upgrade that was expected to take most of the day. Before backing out of the driveway, I followed the routine that had become second nature. I walked through the garage, checked every lock, verified each camera was online, and confirmed the cloud backup was active. Green status lights glowed across the small network cabinet mounted above my workbench. Everything was recording exactly as it should. I locked the side entry door, watched the overhead garage door close completely, and drove away without another thought. Around 11:30, while standing on a ladder mounting a new camera outside my customer's warehouse, my phone vibrated with a motion alert. Normally, I would glance at the notification and return to work because delivery drivers triggered the system all the time. This alert felt different. It came from an interior motion sensor instead of the driveway camera. I climbed down the ladder, apologized to my customer for taking a moment, and opened the security application. The live feed appeared almost instantly. At first, I only saw the familiar concrete floor and the shelves along the back wall. Then the camera adjusted its exposure, and 2 figures stepped into view. They were wearing the Same blue homeowners association shirts I had seen around the neighborhood for weeks. One inspector looked toward the ceiling as if checking for lights while the other slowly pushed my garage door farther open from the inside. My pulse quickened, but I forced myself to stay perfectly calm. The audio feed captured the scrape of shoes across the concrete, the soft click of cabinet handles opening, and the unmistakable sound of someone moving plastic storage bins that did not belong to them. They spoke casually, almost confidently, commenting on the equipment stacked along my shelves and wondering whether some of it violated community standards. One inspector lifted a clipboard while the other raised a tablet and photographed nearly everything in sight. Neither of them showed the slightest hesitation. They acted like they had every right to be there. I zoomed in on another camera angle and immediately noticed something else. They had not damaged the lock or forced the overhead door. Whatever method they used to get inside had left no obvious sign of entry. That realization bothered me even more than watching them walk around my workspace. They believed they were protected by authority, and confidence like that usually came from habit rather than a single bad decision. I resisted every instinct to call them or race home. Years spent installing security systems had taught me one lesson above all others. Never interrupt someone who is creating clear evidence with their own actions. Quietly, I opened the recording manager and marked every active camera feed for permanent preservation. The system automatically copied the files to an encrypted cloud archive and a local backup server at the same time. Even if one recording somehow disappeared, several others would remain untouched. As I watched the inspectors continue opening cabinets and documenting items that had never left the privacy of my garage, I realized the disagreement over neighborhood rules had just crossed a line that could not be explained away with another carefully worded letter. For the next 18 minutes, I barely moved. My customer assumed I was reviewing installation diagrams on my phone, but in reality, I was watching 12 synchronized camera feeds that captured every step unfolding inside my garage. One inspector opened a cabinet containing spare alarm panels that had not even been removed from their factory boxes. The other leaned over my workbench, zooming in with the tablet camera to photograph handwritten project notes that contained nothing more exciting than equipment serial numbers and installation schedules. They opened plastic storage bins, examined extension cords, counted paint cans, and even commented that my shelving looked too industrial for a residential neighborhood. The conversation drifted in and out through the microphones, but one sentence stood out with remarkable clarity. One inspector quietly asked whether they should wait until I was home. The other answered with complete confidence, saying that if they documented enough concerns now, they could justify additional enforcement later. That sentence alone changed everything. This was no longer about verifying an exterior condition that anyone walking down the sidewalk could observe. They were actively searching for reasons to create violations inside a private workspace after I had already declined their inspection request in writing. I enlarged another camera view and noticed something they had completely overlooked. Every movement they made overlapped with another angle. When one camera lost sight of a cabinet door because of its position, another camera recorded it perfectly. Years earlier, I had designed the layout specifically to eliminate blind spots because expensive equipment occasionally remained in my garage overnight before commercial installations. Ironically, the same system that protected my customers' inventory was now preserving an incredibly detailed timeline of every decision these inspectors made. I quietly exported short clips as the recording continued, labeling each file with the exact timestamp before saving duplicate copies to separate encrypted folders. My hands remained steady. There was no reason to rush. Evidence collected carefully is always stronger than evidence gathered in panic. Several minutes later, one inspector walked toward the side entrance, paused beside the network cabinet, and glanced directly at one of the cameras. For a brief second, I wondered whether they had finally realized they were being recorded. Instead, the inspector simply adjusted a shirt collar, smiled at something the other person said, and continued toward another shelf. They never attempted to hide their actions because they genuinely believed they were acting within their authority. That confidence became the most revealing piece of evidence of all. Before leaving, they slowly returned several items to approximately the same locations where they had found them. They closed cabinet doors, straightened a storage bin, and walked back toward the garage entrance. One of them looked around one final time before pulling the door shut behind them. Seconds later, the motion alert stopped. The cameras returned to an empty garage, and silence filled every screen. I remained where I was for another minute, replaying the recordings from different angles to confirm nothing had been missed. Every important moment had been captured. Every movement had a timestamp. Every conversation existed in multiple audio files. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, climbed the ladder again, and calmly finished installing my customer's security camera exactly as scheduled. For the first time since moving into Willow Creek, I was no longer wondering whether anyone would believe my concerns. I already had something far more powerful than an argument. I had a complete record that allowed the facts to speak entirely for themselves. I drove home that evening without calling anyone. The temptation to confront the inspectors the moment I pulled into my driveway crossed my mind more than once during the 40-minute drive, but experience kept reminding me that emotional reactions rarely produce good outcomes. Facts did. Procedures did. Documentation did. When I stepped into my garage, everything looked almost exactly the way I had left it that morning. The cabinets were closed. The workbench was neat. My tools sat where they belonged. If I had not watched the recordings myself, I never would have guessed that strangers had spent nearly 20 minutes walking through the space while I was gone. I set my laptop on the workbench, connected directly to the backup server, and began reviewing every camera angle one more time. I created a detailed timeline, noting the exact second the garage door opened, each cabinet that was accessed, every photograph the inspectors took, and every conversation that had been captured by the microphones. Then I matched those timestamps against the cloud archive to verify that every file had uploaded successfully. Nothing was missing. Every recording was intact. Only after everything had been organized did I make my first phone call. It was not to the Homeowners Association. It was to an attorney a longtime customer had recommended several years earlier, someone who specialized in property rights and civil disputes. We scheduled a meeting for the following morning. When I arrived at his office with my laptop and external drive, he listened carefully without interrupting while I explained the entire sequence of events, beginning with the inspection requests I had declined in writing weeks earlier. Then we watched the recordings together. He did not speak for several minutes. Instead, he replayed several clips, zoomed in on timestamps, and compared different camera angles. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and smiled in the quiet way professionals do when they recognize that the evidence is stronger than they expected. His first recommendation surprised me. He told me not to post the recordings online, not to argue with anyone from the association, and not to discuss the videos with neighbors. Public attention could come later if necessary. For now, he wanted every conversation to happen through formal channels. That afternoon, his office prepared a preservation notice requiring the Homeowners Association to retain all inspection records, internal communications, photographs, electronic messages, and access logs related to my property. At the same time, we prepared a detailed written summary supported by still images taken directly from the recordings. Every statement referenced a timestamp instead of an opinion. Every claim pointed back to documented evidence. We also requested clarification regarding who had authorized access to my garage after I had explicitly declined an interior inspection. Before the letters were even delivered, another unexpected piece of the puzzle appeared. My smart lock system generated a historical access report showing that no authorized digital key had been used to enter through the side door that morning. Combined with the camera footage showing no signs of forced entry, the report narrowed the possibilities considerably. Someone clearly believed they possessed authority that extended beyond the written rules governing the community. They had relied on confidence instead of permission, and now that confidence was preserved frame by frame on multiple secure servers. As I closed my laptop that evening, I realized I had not raised my voice once since discovering the intrusion. I had simply allowed the evidence to become impossible to ignore, and sometimes the strongest response is giving the truth enough room to stand on its own. The response from the Homeowners Association arrived 4 days later, and it was exactly what my attorney expected. Their letter insisted that all inspection activities had been conducted appropriately and that community standards required reasonable verification when potential violations were suspected. What the letter did not explain was how inspectors had entered a private garage after receiving a written refusal for interior access. There was no mention of permission, no reference to an emergency, no explanation of who had authorized the visit. That silence spoke louder than the carefully polished language surrounding it. My attorney responded by requesting a special meeting with the association board and informed them that we intended to present documented evidence directly to the directors before considering any additional legal action. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening in the clubhouse where I had attended my first association gathering months earlier. Walking into that room felt strangely familiar. The same rows of folding chairs filled the hall. The same framed photographs of neighborhood events decorated the walls. The same board members sat behind a long table at the front of the room. The only difference was that this time I carried a laptop instead of unanswered questions. Linda Harper entered a few minutes later with the same composed expression I had seen at every previous meeting. She greeted residents politely and took her seat without looking in my direction. If she felt concerned, she did not show it. After routine business concluded, the board president invited my attorney to present our concerns. He stood, thanked everyone for their time, and spoke calmly for less than 2 minutes before connecting my laptop to the large television mounted at the front of the room. There were no dramatic speeches, no raised voices, no accusations, only timestamps, synchronized camera angles, and recorded events presented in chronological order. The first video showed the garage door opening. The second displayed the inspectors entering without me present. Another camera captured cabinets being opened. A fourth angle showed photographs being taken throughout the workspace. Then the audio recording played clearly enough for everyone in the room to hear the inspectors discussing the possibility of documenting enough concerns to justify future enforcement. The room became remarkably quiet. Several board members leaned forward in their chairs. One reached for a copy of the governing documents that had been placed on the table before the meeting. Linda's expression slowly changed as each clip continued. She was no longer smiling. She looked toward the inspectors seated across the room as though expecting an explanation that never came. My attorney then displayed my written refusal of the requested interior inspection alongside the relevant section of the community rules describing homeowner consent. The comparison required no interpretation because the language was straightforward. One board member asked whether anyone had obtained my permission before entering the garage. No one answered immediately. Another director quietly requested that the recordings be replayed from the beginning. They watched every important moment a second time. When the final clip ended, the silence lasted several long seconds before. The board president announced that an independent review would begin immediately and that all enforcement activity involving my property would be suspended pending its outcome. For the first time since moving into Willow Creek, the discussion was no longer about my garage or supposed violations. It was about accountability, documented facts, and whether the people trusted to enforce the rules had followed them themselves. The independent review took several weeks, but once it began, events moved in a direction no carefully worded letter could stop. The association hired outside legal counsel to examine inspection records, internal communications, and access procedures. Residents who had quietly accepted warning notices for years suddenly started asking questions of their own. Several neighbors contacted the review committee after hearing that security recordings had documented an unauthorized entry into a homeowner's private garage. Some shared copies of old violation notices. Others described inspection requests that had always seemed unusual but had never been challenged because they assumed the association's authority was unlimited. As more information surfaced, a pattern slowly emerged. The problem was never the neighborhood itself. Willow Creek was still the same peaceful community where children rode bicycles after school and families gathered in front yards on warm evenings. The real issue had been a culture where confidence had gradually replaced accountability. When the final review concluded, the board released a written summary to every homeowner. It confirmed that inspection procedures involving my property had not followed the association's own governing documents and announced immediate policy changes requiring documented homeowner consent before any future interior access could even be considered except under clearly defined emergency circumstances. The inspectors involved were removed from inspection duties while additional administrative actions were taken internally. Linda Harper resigned from her position before the next monthly meeting, and a newly elected board promised greater transparency with residents moving forward. My attorney and I eventually reached a civil resolution with the association that included reimbursement for legal expenses and a formal acknowledgement that my written refusal should have been respected from the beginning. More important than any financial outcome was knowing that the rules would now apply equally to everyone responsible for enforcing them. A few months later, I was back in my garage on a quiet Saturday morning, organizing new equipment before another installation. The familiar smell of cedar shelves, fresh coffee, and machine oil filled the room exactly as it had when I first moved into the house. Sunlight filtered beneath the open garage door, while classic rock played softly from the old speaker above my workbench. The cameras remained exactly where I had installed them, still recording silently, still backing up every frame without drawing attention to themselves. I smiled every time I glanced at them because they had never shouted, argued, or accused anyone. They had simply preserved the truth until the right people were ready to see it. Looking back, I realized the most important lesson had nothing to do with security systems or neighborhood politics. It was that patience is often stronger than confrontation, and careful documentation can accomplish what anger never will. If I had rushed home that afternoon, demanded explanations, or turned the situation into a public argument before organizing the evidence, the story might have ended very differently. Instead, I trusted facts to carry the weight that emotions could not. Every photograph I had taken, every letter I had saved, every timestamp I had organized, and every camera I had installed became part of a complete picture that spoke for itself. Today, my garage is still my workshop, still my office, and still the place where I quietly rebuild things one project at a time. The locks are the same. The shelves are the same. Even the cameras are the same. The only real difference is that everyone in Willow Creek now understands something that should have been obvious from the very beginning. Respect for a community starts with respect for the people who live in it, and real justice is never the loudest voice in the room. It is simply the truth, documented carefully enough that nobody can honestly look away.